quiet funeral takes a strange turn when a family dog begins barking at the coffin. The family decides to open it, only to reveal a heartbreaking and unexpected truth. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. Springfield had never seemed smaller than on the day of Bill's funeral. The morning brought a heavy fog that clung to the chapel's worn brick walls, matching the somber mood of the gathering crowd. The chapel, typically reserved for Sunday services and occasional weddings, now held Bill's closed casket at its center, surrounded by arrangements of white lilies and roses. Lily Montgomery stood at the entrance, greeting mourners with quiet nods. At 20, she felt out of place managing these social obligations, but her grandmother Margaret was too distraught to handle them. People filed past, offering condolences that all started to sound the same. "He was a good man," they'd say, "or we'll miss him dearly." Lily responded with practiced gratitude, though these platitudes did little to fill the void left by her grandfather's passing. The funeral director, Mr. Henderson, moved efficiently through the chapel, directing family members to their seats in the front pews. Lily's father Thomas sat rigidly beside Margaret, who dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief that had barely left her hands since Bill's passing 3 days ago. Lily's aunts and uncles filled the remaining front row seats, their faces showing varying degrees of grief. Rocky's arrival changed everything. The golden retriever had been Bill's constant companion for the past 8 years, and Margaret had initially insisted on leaving him at home. But Rocky's howling had become so persistent that Thomas finally brought him to the chapel. The dog padded down the center aisle, his nails clicking against the wooden floor, drawing disapproving glances from some of the more traditional mourners. At first, Rocky behaved perfectly, lying quietly at Margaret's feet. But as Reverend Stevens began the service, something changed. Rocky's ears perked up, and his tail began to thump against the floor. The Reverend's words about Bill's dedication to family and community were interrupted by a low whine. "Rocky, hush," Margaret whispered, but the dog ignored her. His whine grew into a bark, then another, each one more urgent than the last. The Reverend paused, clearing his throat uncomfortably as the barking continued. "Someone should take that dog outside," muttered Aunt Sarah from her seat behind Lily. But Lily wasn't focused on the disruption. She watched Rocky intently, noting how his attention remained fixed on the casket. The dog wasn't just barking randomly, he was trying to tell them something. The barking grew more frantic. Rocky pulled away from Margaret's grasp and bounded toward the casket, placing his paws on its side. The funeral director moved to intervene, but Lily was faster. She approached the casket, drawn by an inexplicable certainty that this moment mattered. "Lily, get back to your seat," her father hissed, but she ignored him. Rocky's barking had reached a fever pitch, and now he was scratching at the casket's side. The mourners watched in shocked silence as Lily reached for the casket's lid. "Young lady, that is highly inappropriate," Mr. Henderson started, but his words faded as Lily's fingers found the latch. The chapel fell silent, except for Rocky's continued barking. Even the Reverend seemed frozen in place, his prayer book forgotten in his hands. Lily felt everyone's eyes on her, but she couldn't stop. Her grandfather had always told her to trust her instincts, and right now, every instinct she had was screaming that she needed to open that casket. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the lid. The gasp that echoed through the chapel came from multiple throats at once. Bill lay peacefully in his best suit, exactly as the funeral home had prepared him. But there, tucked beside his folded hands, was something that shouldn't have been there. A worn, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. Rocky's barking stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening. "What is that?" Margaret's voice quavered from the front pew. But Lily already knew. This was more than just a journal. This was the key to understanding who her grandfather really was, and why Rocky had been so desperate to draw their attention to it. The funeral had just become something else entirely. The leather-bound journal sat heavy in Lily's hands as she stepped back from the casket. Its worn cover bore no title, just Bill's initials, WM, stamped in faded gold leaf on the bottom right corner. The binding was cracked from years of use, and several loose pages threatened to slip free. "Close that casket right now," Thomas demanded, rising from his seat. But Margaret raised her hand, stopping him. Her eyes were fixed on the journal, recognition flickering across her face. "Where did you get that?" Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She gripped the pew in front of her, knuckles white with tension. Lily opened the journal to its first page. Dated June 15th, 1962. The handwriting was unmistakably Bill's, the same precise penmanship that had signed her birthday cards every year. Rocky sat at her feet now, completely calm, as if his mission had been accomplished. "Today I met her," Lily read aloud, her voice carrying through the silent chapel. She walked into Jackson's diner wearing a blue dress that matched the summer sky. "I've never seen anyone so beautiful. Her name is Evelyn Cooper, and I know I'll remember this day for the rest of my life." The effect of that name was immediate. Margaret let out a sharp breath, and Aunt Sarah dropped her hymnal with a loud clatter. Uncle Robert, Bill's younger brother, stood up abruptly. "That's enough," he said firmly. "This isn't the time or place." But Lily continued reading, her voice growing stronger. "Evelyn ordered a chocolate malt and told me she's new in town. Her father just took over the hardware store on Main Street. We talked until my break ended, and she promised to come back tomorrow." I can't stop thinking about her laugh. I said, "That's enough." Robert's voice boomed through the chapel. Several mourners jumped in their seats. "Show some respect for your grandmother." Lily looked up from the journal to find Margaret staring straight ahead, tears streaming down her face. But there was something else in her expression, not just grief, but recognition. She knew about Evelyn. The funeral director stepped forward again, clearly unsure how to handle this deviation from normal protocol. "Perhaps we should continue with the service," he suggested diplomatically. Lily flipped through more pages, dates jumping forward through the summer of 1962. Each entry spoke of Evelyn, walks by the river, shared sodas at Jackson's, dreams of a future together. But then, in late August, the tone changed dramatically. "They're sending her away," Lily read, her voice catching. "Her father found our letters. Says a Cooper can't be seen with someone like me. She's leaving for boarding school tomorrow. I don't know how to say goodbye." The chapel had grown uncomfortably warm. Several people shifted in their seats, while others stared at their hands, embarrassed to be witnessing such an intimate moment. But Lily couldn't stop. She needed to understand. The next entry was dated September 1st, 1962. "I saw her one last time today. We met behind the hardware store at midnight. She cried in my arms and promised she'd never forget me. I gave her my class ring and told her I'd wait. But we both knew it was a lie. Some promises are meant to be broken." Margaret stood up suddenly, her movement jerky and uncoordinated. "I knew," she said, her voice cracking. "I always knew about her. Bill told me everything before we got married." This revelation sent a ripple through the assembled mourners. Aunt Sarah gasped audibly, while Uncle Robert sank back into his pew. The fight gone out of him. "He said he'd moved on," Margaret continued, her words coming faster now. "Said Evelyn was in his past, but he kept that journal all these years. Kept it right there with him until the end." The weight of this revelation settled over the chapel like a heavy blanket. Lily looked down at the journal, understanding now why Rocky had been so insistent. This wasn't just a record of a young man's first love. It was the key to understanding the complicated man her grandfather had been. But as she turned to the next page, she realized there was much more to discover. The entries continued well past 1962, speaking of secret meetings, letters exchanged through trusted friends, and a love that never truly died. This wasn't just a story of young love lost. It was the beginning of a mystery that would shake their family to its core. Rocky pressed against her leg, as if urging her to keep reading. And Lily knew, with absolute certainty, that her grandfather had wanted this journal to be found. The question was, why now, and what other secrets did these pages hold? The heat of the chapel had become unbearable as Lily continued reading. Her fingers trembled as she turned to entries from later years, revealing a story that spanned decades. The mourners sat transfixed, funeral protocol completely forgotten. December 24th, 1975. Lily read, her voice steady despite the tension. Saw Evelyn at the grocery store today. She's back in Springfield after her divorce. Our eyes met across the produce section, and 13 years disappeared in an instant. Margaret was in the next aisle with the kids. I pretended to be looking for oranges until Evelyn left. Some wounds never heal. Uncle Robert rubbed his temples, recognition dawning on his face. That Christmas, he said slowly, Dad was so distracted during dinner. Mum broke her favorite serving dish, and he didn't even notice. Margaret remained standing, swaying slightly. I saw them, she admitted, her voice hollow. I saw them looking at each other. I just didn't want to believe it meant anything. Lily flipped through more pages, entries becoming more frequent through the late 1970s. Each one revealed clandestine meetings at the library, brief conversations at community events, letters passed through mutual friends. Bill and Evelyn had maintained a connection that ran parallel to their separate lives, hidden in plain sight. March 15th, 1980, Lily continued. Met E at Carson's Cafe while Margaret was at her sister's. She's teaching at the high school now. We talked for hours about the lives we could have had, about the choices we made, about regret. She still wears my class ring on a chain around her neck. Thomas stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. Are we going to let this continue? This man was married to Mum for 45 years. But Margaret raised her hand again, silencing him. Let her read, Thomas. I need to hear this. The next entry made Lily pause. She looked up at her grandmother, hesitating for the first time. Are you sure? Margaret nodded, her face set with determination. September 3rd, 1982. Margaret knows. She found one of E's letters in my workshop. We talked all night. She asked if I wanted to leave, to be with Evelyn. I told her the truth, that I love them both, differently but completely, that I made my choice years ago to be a husband and father, and I won't go back on that. Margaret surprised me. She said she's always known there was a part of me she couldn't reach. Said maybe that's true for everyone. A sob escaped Margaret's throat. I remember that night, she said. I remember every word. He was so honest, so torn. I could have left him then, but I chose to stay. Because the Bill I knew, the man who raised our children and built our life together, he was real too. The revelations kept coming. Through the 1990s, Bill and Evelyn maintained their connection through letters and occasional meetings. They never crossed physical boundaries, but their emotional bond remained unbroken. Bill wrote about watching Evelyn's career flourish, about their shared love of poetry, about the bittersweet joy of seeing her at community events. Then came an entry that made Lily's blood run cold. July 12th, 2023, E is sick. Cancer. She asked to see me one last time. I had to go. The chapel fell completely silent. Even Rocky, who had been lying quietly at Lily's feet, lifted his head. We met at the old bridge where we used to walk. She could barely stand, but her eyes were the same. She gave me back my class ring, said she wanted me to have it again, said she's never regretted loving me, even if we couldn't be together. I held her hand until the sun set. It felt like saying goodbye to a piece of myself. Margaret sank back into her pew, understanding flooding her features. That's why he was so different these past few months. Evelyn died in August. Lily turned to the final pages of the journal. The last entry was dated just 3 days before Bill's own death. I've lived 2 lives, she read, her voice breaking. One with Margaret, filled with family, responsibility, and a deep, steady love that grew stronger over decades. Another with Evelyn, existing in moments stolen from time, in words written but never spoken, in a love that never had the chance to grow old. I'm not proud of the pain I caused, but I can't regret either love. They made me who I am. The journal's final pages contained something else. A letter addressed to Lily herself, and a key. As she held these items, she realized that Bill's story wasn't finished. There were more secrets to uncover, more truths to face. The funeral had become a doorway to a past none of them truly understood. And somewhere in Springfield, that key would unlock the final pieces of Bill's complex legacy. Rocky stood up, nudging the letter in Lily's hands. The next chapter of their family's story was about to begin. Mr. Henderson suggested moving the family to the chapel's side room, away from the shocked gazes of other mourners. The wood-paneled space, usually reserved for grieving families to gather before services, now became the stage for a long-overdue confrontation. You knew, Thomas accused his mother, pacing the room's worn carpet. You knew all this time about Dad and this woman, and you said nothing. Margaret sat in a straight-backed chair, her posture rigid. What would you have had me say, Thomas? Children, your father loves another woman, but don't worry, he's staying with us. Aunt Sarah leaned against the wall, arms crossed. I remember Evelyn Cooper. She taught my senior English class. All those times Dad volunteered to help with school events. He wasn't volunteering for you, Thomas snapped. He was sneaking around behind Mum's back. Lily sat with the journal in her lap, Rocky's head resting on her knee. The letter from Bill remained unopened in her hand. The key, small and tarnished, felt heavy in her pocket. You're wrong, Margaret said quietly. Her voice cut through the tension like a knife. Your father never snuck around. After I found out we had rules, everything was in the open between us. He showed me every letter, told me about every meeting. Uncle Robert pushed himself away from the window he'd been staring through. But why, Mum? Why would you accept that? Margaret's laugh was bitter. Because I had my own secret. Thomas, do you remember Mr. Andrews from the bank? Thomas stopped pacing. Your old boss. What about him? He wasn't just my boss. Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. For 3 years, we shared lunches, talked for hours. He understood parts of me that Bill never could. We never acted on it, but the feeling was there. Bill knew. We both understood that love isn't as simple as we pretend it is. The revelation hit the room like a physical force. Sarah slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor. Robert returned to his window. Thomas just stared at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. I have something to confess to, Robert said suddenly, his voice rough. Remember Linda Patterson? The reason I transferred to the Dallas office wasn't a promotion. I was running away because she was married, and I couldn't trust myself around her anymore. Sarah laughed, a sound caught between tears and hysteria. God, we're all such messes, aren't we? I've been dating my divorce lawyer for 6 months. Haven't told anyone because I was afraid of what Dad would think. And now, Lily watched her family members' confessions tumble out, years of hidden feelings and suppressed truths finally finding voice. It was as if Bill's journal had unlocked something in all of them. Permission to be human, to be flawed, to be real. The letter, Margaret said suddenly, looking at Lily. What does it say? Lily's hand shook as she opened the envelope. The paper was fresh, dated just days before Bill's death. My dearest Lily, she read. If you're reading this, then Rocky has done his job. That dog always knew when something needed to be brought to light. I chose you to find this journal because you, more than anyone in our family, understand that love isn't a simple thing. Thomas started to interrupt, but Margaret silenced him with a look. The key I've left you opens a safety deposit box at Springfield National Bank. In it, you'll find letters, hundreds of them, not just between Evelyn and me, but between your grandmother and James Andrews, between your Uncle Robert and Linda, between your Aunt Sarah and men she never told us about. Our family has always been full of deep loves. Some lived, some lost, some hidden away. The room erupted in shocked exclamations, but Lily continued reading. I collected these letters over the years. Each person trusted me with their secrets, their hopes, their regrets. I kept them safe, knowing that someday they would need to be shared. Not to cause pain, but to show that our family's capacity for love, in all its complicated forms, is what makes us who we are. Rocky whined softly, pressing closer to Lily's leg. The final letter in that box is from Evelyn, written the day before she died. She made me promise to share it with all of you. She had something to tell us. Something that will change everything we think we know about our family. The letter ended there. Lily looked up to find every eye in the room fixed on her. "Well," Thomas said, his voice hoarse, "I guess we're going to the bank." The family's secrets were unraveling, but something told Lily that the biggest revelation was still to come. The key in her pocket seemed to pulse with possibility. Rocky stood, tail wagging slowly, as if he knew their journey was just beginning. The dog had brought Bill's journal to light. Now it was up to them to uncover the rest of their family's hidden truths. The Springfield National Bank stood like a granite sentinel in the late afternoon sun. The family had left the funeral without ceremony, Mr. Henderson looking relieved to see them go. They arrived at the bank in separate cars, but moved as one unit through the heavy glass doors, still wearing their funeral clothes. Mrs. Montgomery, the bank manager, Mr. Phillips, greeted Margaret with surprise. "I'm so sorry for your loss. We weren't expecting." "We need to access Bill's safety deposit box," Margaret interrupted. Her voice was steady now. "Purpose replacing grief. Our granddaughter has the key." Lily stepped forward, producing the tarnished key from her pocket. Rocky waited outside with Sarah, his duty seemingly complete. The rest of the family followed Mr. Phillips to the vault, their formal shoes clicking against the marble floor. The safety deposit box was larger than expected. When Mr. Phillips left them in the private viewing room, Lily inserted the key with trembling fingers. Inside, they found several bundles of letters, each tied with different colored ribbons and labeled meticulously in Bill's handwriting. "Green for Robert and Linda," Lily read, handling each bundle. "Blue for Sarah, red for Mum and Mr. Andrews." She paused at a purple ribbon. "And violet for Evelyn." Each family member took their respective bundles, the room falling silent except for the sound of paper being handled with care. Margaret opened the first letter from James Andrews, her eyes filling with tears at the sight of the familiar handwriting. "My dearest Margaret," she read softly, "another day at the bank without telling you how much you mean to me. Your husband is a good man, and I respect the choice you've made. But know that my feelings—" She stopped, pressing the letter to her chest. Robert untied his green ribbon slowly. "Linda's last letter," he said, voice rough. "She told me she was pregnant. That's why I left Dallas. The baby. It could have been mine." Sarah's hands shook as she read through her letters. "Dad knew everything," she whispered. "Every relationship, every heartbreak. He kept them all." But Lily's attention was drawn to the final letter in the box. It sat alone, sealed in a cream-colored envelope with "To my other family" written in unfamiliar handwriting. Evelyn's last words. "Should I?" Lily asked, looking at her grandmother. Margaret nodded. "It's time we know everything." The letter's pages were crisp, the ink barely dry. Evelyn's handwriting was elegant but shaky, evidence of her illness. "Dear ones," Lily read, "by the time you read this, both Bill and I will be gone. We planned it this way. Yes, Bill knew his heart was failing. We chose to keep our final secret until we could both be at peace." Thomas sank into a chair, color draining from his face. "In 1963, after my father sent me away, I discovered I was pregnant. My family hid me away at a private hospital in Vermont. On November 15, 1963, I gave birth to a daughter. The adoption records were sealed, but Bill and I never stopped looking for her. 3 years ago, we found her. The room went completely still. Even the bank's ambient noise seemed to fade away. Her name is Claire. She's a doctor in Boston, married with 2 children of her own. Bill and I met her privately last year. We told her everything. She wants to know her family, all of you. She has Bill's eyes and my love of poetry. She's the best of both of us. Margaret's hands gripped the arms of her chair. A daughter, she whispered. He had a daughter. Margaret, Lily continued reading. I know this must hurt you deeply, but Claire is as much a victim of our choices as anyone. Bill loved you truly and completely. His love for me, and for the daughter we shared, lived in a different part of his heart. One love did not diminish the other. Claire will be at Bill's house tomorrow afternoon. She has his study key, the one he always claimed he lost. In his desk, she'll find papers acknowledging her as his daughter, and a letter explaining everything to the family lawyer. It was Bill's final wish that our families become one, that all the secret loves and hidden truths that shaped us finally come to light. With eternal love and hope for understanding, Evelyn. The safety deposit box held one final item, a photograph of Bill and Evelyn, aged but smiling, standing with a woman in her 50s, who shared features from both of them. On the back was written, "Family, at last." 2023, through the bank's windows, they could see Rocky sitting patiently outside. The dog had brought them to this moment, guided by Bill's planning and Evelyn's love. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more tears, more truths. But for now, they sat together, each holding pieces of Bill's legacy, a legacy of complicated love, painful choices, and the enduring power of forgiveness. The real funeral, they realized, wouldn't be the formal service they'd left behind. It would be tomorrow, when they would finally meet the daughter Bill had loved from afar for so many years, and begin to understand the true meaning of family. The next afternoon found the family gathered at Bill's house, the modest two-story home where he and Margaret had lived for 45 years. The formal funeral clothes had been replaced with casual wear, though the mood remained solemn. Rocky lay on his usual spot by the front window, watching the street intently. At precisely 3 o'clock, a silver BMW pulled into the driveway. Rocky's tail began to wag, recognizing the driver before anyone else did. The woman who stepped out of the car carried herself with Bill's confident posture and had Evelyn's delicate features. She paused at the front walk, taking a deep breath before approaching the door. Margaret was the one who opened it. The two women stood face to face, the wife and the daughter, both victims and beneficiaries of a love story spanning 6 decades. "Mrs. Montgomery," Claire said softly, "I'm Claire Henderson. I believe you've been expecting me." Margaret's response surprised everyone. She stepped forward and wrapped Claire in a tight embrace. "Call me Margaret," she whispered. "You have his eyes." The study key turned smoothly in the lock, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Claire led them into Bill's sanctuary, a room that still smelled of his pipe tobacco and leather-bound books. She went directly to his desk, knowing exactly which drawer to open. "Dad showed me where everything was last year," she explained, the word "dad" falling naturally from her lips. "He wanted to tell you all then, but he was waiting for the right moment. When he learned about his heart condition, he and Mum, Evelyn, decided it was time to put everything in order." The drawer contained a thick manila envelope addressed to the family lawyer, along with individual letters for each family member. But it was the photo album that caught everyone's attention. Claire opened it carefully, revealing pictures they'd never seen before. "This was the day they found me," she said, pointing to a photo of herself with Bill and Evelyn. "I'd always known I was adopted, but I never expected. When they told me the truth, everything in my life suddenly made sense. Why I loved poetry like Mum, why I had Dad's terrible sense of humor." Sarah moved closer, examining the photos. "You have his smile too," she observed. "The way it starts on one side first." Claire smiled then, demonstrating the inherited trait. "He said the same thing. We had a year together, weekly phone calls, monthly visits. Mum was already sick by then, but she held on long enough to see me settled into the family, at least part of the family." Thomas, who had been quiet since the bank, finally spoke. "Did he suffer at the end?" Claire's eyes filled with tears. "No, he knew it was coming. The day after Mum passed, He called me and said, "It's time." He'd planned everything. The journal, Rocky's role, the safety deposit box. He didn't want to leave any loose ends. Robert cleared his throat. The letters, our letters. Why did he keep them? Because, Claire said, pulling out another album, he understood complicated love better than anyone. Look. This album contained photographs spanning decades. James Andrews at a bank function, standing too close to Margaret. Linda Patterson at a company picnic, her hand brushing Robert's. Sarah's various boyfriends at family events, each capturing a moment of connection that everyone else had missed. He saw everything, Claire explained, and he kept every piece of evidence of love he could find. He believed that love, in all its forms, was worth preserving. Lily sat at Bill's desk chair, running her hands over the worn lever. But why tell us now? Why not take these secrets to his grave? Claire reached into her bag and pulled out a final letter. This one, written in both Bill and Evelyn's handwriting. They wrote this together last month. It explains everything. The family gathered around as Lily read aloud. To our beloved family, we've lived our lives divided by secrets, separated by choices made in youth and maintained through duty. But love doesn't die when it's denied. It goes underground, grows roots, waits for its moment to bloom again. In Claire, we found our love given form, given life. In each of your secret loves, we found echoes of our own story. It's time to bring everything into the light. Rocky padded into the study, moving directly to Claire. She knelt to pet him, tears falling freely now. Dad said Rocky knew who I was the first time I visited. Dogs always know the truth. Margaret picked up a framed photo from Bill's desk, one of their entire family at last year's Christmas gathering. "There's room for one more in next year's picture," she said quietly, "if you'd like to be there." Claire looked round at these people who were both strangers and blood, united by one man's complex heart. "I'd like that very much." As the afternoon light slanted through Bill's study windows, the family began to share stories, not just about Bill and Evelyn, but about all their loves, their losses, their secrets now brought into the open. Rocky moved from person to person, offering comfort where it was needed most, still fulfilling his role as Bill's faithful messenger. The last funeral task awaited them. Bill had requested his ashes be scattered at the old bridge, where he and Evelyn had said their final goodbye. But that would wait for another day. Today was for the living, for the new connections being forged, for the family that was both ending and beginning again. As evening approached, Claire began unpacking boxes from her car. "There's something else you should see," she said, carrying a weathered cardboard box into Bill's study. Mum, Evelyn, kept everything too. The box contained a parallel history to their own. Photographs, letters, and mementos from the other side of Bill's life. Margaret sat closer, her initial hesitation giving way to curiosity. "This was their spot," Claire explained, showing them a faded photograph of a young Bill and Evelyn at the old bridge. Even after they couldn't be together, they would sometimes meet there just to talk. Mum said it was their sanctuary. Thomas picked up a stack of postcards. "These are from all over the country," Claire nodded. Dad would send them whenever he traveled for work. Never signed them, just wrote quotes from their favorite poems. Mum knew they were from him. "Hope is the thing with feathers." Lily read from one postcard. Emily Dickinson, their favorite, Claire confirmed. They both taught it to me separately. Dad, during our phone calls. Mum, when she was sick. Neither knew the other had shared it. Sarah discovered a small velvet box at the bottom of the larger container. Inside was Bill's class ring, still hanging from its delicate chain. "She wore this for 60 years, Sarah whispered, running her finger over the worn metal. "Until the day she died," Claire said softly. "She wanted Dad to have it back. I think she knew they'd be together soon." Rocky, who had been dozing in the corner, suddenly lifted his head. His tail began to wag as Claire pulled out one final item, a leather-bound volume of poetry. "This was their real diary," she explained. "They would underline words and phrases to communicate. Sometimes they'd go months without seeing each other, but they could have entire conversations through these marked passages. Margaret took the book with trembling hands. Opening it randomly, she found a passage with certain words carefully underlined: love and endures and silence. In the margin, dates had been penciled in, dates that corresponded to significant family events. Here, Margaret pointed, the day Thomas was born, and Sarah's wedding. They were marking our family's moments too. Mum said she prayed for all of you, Claire revealed. Every Sunday, she'd light a candle for the family she could never know. She kept photos from the local newspaper, school graduations, business announcements, anything that mentioned any of you. Robert found a newspaper clipping of his business award from 1985. She was watching us grow up from a distance. She was proud of you all, Claire said. She said you were proof of Dad's goodness, his capacity for love and dedication. She never resented your happiness. Lily discovered a series of sealed envelopes at the bottom of the box, each addressed to a different family member. She wrote to us too. Her final months, Claire explained. She wanted each of you to know her heart, to understand that she never meant to cause pain. Margaret opened her envelope first. Her hands shook as she read. Dearest Margaret, you shared the love of my life, gave him the family I couldn't. Your strength in knowing about us and still choosing love humbles me. In another life, I think we could have been friends. The room grew quiet as each person read their letter. Sarah learned that Evelyn had attended her violin recitals, sitting in the back row. Thomas discovered she'd kept his high school essay on Romeo and Juliet. He'd won first prize, and Bill had secretly shared it with her. Robert found out she'd recommended him for his first job without ever revealing their connection. She was like a guardian angel, Sarah said, wiping tears, watching over us, caring from afar. Claire smiled sadly. That's exactly how she saw herself. She used to say that loving from a distance taught her to see beauty in small moments. A glimpse of Dad at the grocery store, your achievements in the newspaper, the sound of his voice carrying across a crowded room. Rocky stood suddenly, moving to the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across Bill's study. Soon they would need to face the final task, taking Bill's ashes to the bridge. But for now, they sat surrounded by 60 years of hidden love, finally understanding the full measure of Bill's heart. Tomorrow, Claire said, touching the class ring. Tomorrow, we'll take them both to the bridge. It's what they wanted, to be together, finally, in the place where they never had to hide. The family nodded, each lost in thoughts of love's complexity, of choices made and paths not taken. Through it all, Rocky kept his vigil by the window, as if still guarding the secrets that had shaped them all. Dawn broke over Springfield with a golden haze the next morning. The family gathered at the old bridge before the town awakened, carrying two urns, Bill's, fresh from the funeral home, and Evelyn's, which Claire had brought from Boston. Rocky led the way, his paws sure on the worn wooden planks. The bridge hadn't changed much in 60 years. The carved initials B+E was still visible on the third post, weathered but legible. Claire ran her fingers over the carving, feeling the grooves her parents had left in more hopeful times. Dad brought me here last year, she said, breaking the morning silence. He showed me where they used to meet, told me stories I'd never heard. But there's one story he saved for today. She pulled an envelope from her jacket. He made me promise to read this here, with all of you. Margaret settled on one of the old wooden benches that lined the bridge, the same bench where she'd confronted Bill about Evelyn all those years ago. The others gathered around as Claire began to read. My dearest family, she read, her voice carrying over the sound of the river below. If you're reading this, you're standing where my heart first learned what love truly means. It was here, in 1962, that I kissed Evelyn Cooper and knew my life would never be the same. It was also here, in 1982, that Margaret showed me that love can survive truth. The forgiveness is stronger than betrayal. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, but Margaret reached for his hand, steadying him. What you don't know What no one knows, except Evelyn, is that there's a third story this bridge holds. The night before I married Margaret, I came here to say goodbye to my first love. But Evelyn wasn't alone. She brought her infant daughter, Claire, for me to meet just once before the adoption went through. Claire's voice caught. This part was new to her too. I held my daughter for exactly 7 minutes, counted every second. She had my eyes and Evelyn's smile, and letting her go was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I made 2 promises that night: to be the best husband and father I could be to my new family, and to never stop loving the daughter I couldn't keep. Rocky wind softly pressing against Claire's legs. I kept both promises as best I could. And now, as my life draws to its close, I have one final request. Beneath this bridge, in a watertight box secured to the foundation, is everything you need to understand why today matters so much. Without hesitation, Lily climbed down the embankment, following Rocky, who seemed to know exactly where to go. Behind a loose stone, they found a metal box, its surface pristine despite years of hiding. Inside was a legal document, dated just 3 months ago. As Lily read it, her hands began to shake. "It's his will," she announced, "but not the one the lawyer has. This is different." The document revealed Bill's final master plan. He had secretly purchased the bridge and surrounding land years ago, when the town planned to demolish it. The property was now legally divided between his 2 families, the bridge itself becoming a trust dedicated to preserving it as a place where love stories of all kinds could find their sanctuary. But there was more. Bill had established a foundation, funded by savings he'd accumulated over decades. The foundation's purpose was simple: to help other families torn apart by circumstance find their way back together. He'd named Claire as its director and listed every member of both families as board members. "The bridge was my beginning," Claire continued reading from his letter. "Let it be our family's new beginning too. Let it stand as proof that love doesn't have to choose sides, that hearts can expand to hold more than we imagine possible." Margaret stood slowly, taking one of the urns from Claire. "Then let's give them their wish," she said quietly. Together, the family spread out along the bridge's length, each taking a portion of the ashes. As the sun cleared the horizon, they released Bill and Evelyn's remains into the morning air. The ashes mingled as they fell. Impossible to tell where one ended and the other began, finally and forever intertwined. Rocky barked once, a sound that echoed across the water. In that moment, watching the ashes drift away, each person felt the weight of secrets lifting, replaced by something newer and stronger: understanding. Claire pulled out one final item from her pocket, her father's class ring, still on its chain. With careful movements, she secured it to the post where their initials were carved. "For both my mothers," she said, looking at Margaret, "and for the father who loved us all." The ring caught the morning light, casting small rainbows on the weathered wood. It would stay there, marking this place where love had refused to be bound by convention or time, where a family had been broken and remade, stronger at the mended places. The last secret was out, the last wish fulfilled. The bridge had kept its promises. 6 months after the bridge ceremony, Springfield had changed. The old bridge, once a forgotten landmark, had become a sanctuary of sorts. People left flowers by the post where Bill's class ring hung, sharing their own stories of complicated love and forgiveness. The Montgomery Cooper Family Foundation, as it was now officially known, occupied the renovated hardware store where Evelyn's father had once forbidden their love. Claire had relocated her medical practice to Springfield, working part-time while managing the foundation. The building's front window displayed a simple mission statement: building bridges between hearts. On this particular autumn morning, the family gathered for their first official board meeting. The former store's back room had been converted into a comfortable conference space, with Rocky's bed tucked in the corner. Photos of both Bill and Evelyn hung on the walls, alongside newspaper clippings chronicling the foundation's early successes. "First case," Claire announced, opening a folder. A local man recently discovered he has a 30-year-old daughter from a relationship before his marriage. He wants to connect with her, but doesn't know how to tell his current family. Sounds familiar, Thomas said, his initial resistance having softened over the months. He'd become one of the Foundation's most dedicated advisors, using his experience as a family counselor to help others navigate similar situations. Margaret, who had insisted on being part of every case, leaned forward. What resources does he need? Counseling support, legal advice for potential inheritance issues, and most importantly, mediation between all parties, Claire replied. Dad's story has given him hope, but he's scared. Sarah, who had delayed her return to Dallas to help establish the Foundation, added, "We should connect him with that family therapist who helped us, Dr. Martinez. She understands these situations." Rocky, gray around the muzzle but still alert, perked up as the door chimed. Lily entered, carrying a stack of letters. "More stories," she said, placing them on the conference table. "People read about us in the local paper. They're sharing their own secrets, asking for help." The Foundation had already helped 3 families reunite, using Bill's carefully saved money to provide counseling, legal support, and sometimes just a safe space to meet. Each success felt like a tribute to his memory, a way of multiplying the love he'd managed to share between 2 families. "There's something else," Claire said, pulling out another document. Mum, Evelyn, left journals too. She documented every family she knew of in Springfield that was separated by circumstance or convention. She wanted to help them, but never could. Now we can. Robert picked up one of the journals. She was watching over more than just us, wasn't she? She believed in love's power to heal, Claire confirmed. She wrote that every time she saw Dad with your family, it hurt, but it also gave her hope. She knew he was proving that love could stretch without breaking. Margaret, who had developed an unexpected friendship with Claire, smiled softly. Bill would be proud of this. Both of them would. The Foundation's work had begun to heal more than just the families they helped. Thomas and Claire had discovered a shared interest in photography, spending weekends documenting the bridge's visitors. Sarah had finally introduced her divorce lawyer-turned-boyfriend to the family, finding acceptance instead of judgment. Robert had reached out to Linda, learning he had a college-aged son who wanted to know his biological father. Oh, Lily remembered suddenly. The town council approved our proposal. The bridge is officially a historical landmark now. They're putting up a plaque next week. The plaque would read, "The Montgomery Bridge, where love builds bridges, not walls." Dedicated to William Montgomery and Evelyn Cooper, whose love story teaches us that the heart's capacity for love knows no bounds. Rocky got up from his bed and moved to the window, his routine unchanged. But now he watched over a different kind of family business, one that honored both his master's legacy. "We have one more item," Claire said, her voice softening. "I found this in Mom's things. It's her last diary entry, written the day before she died." The room fell quiet as Claire read, "Tomorrow I'll see Bill one last time. We've loved each other for 60 years, mostly from a distance. But love isn't measured in proximity. It's measured in loyalty, in sacrifice, in the quiet ways we hold space for each other in our hearts. Bill and I chose love in all its forms. The love we couldn't have, the love he built with Margaret, the love for our daughter we had to hide. Now, as our time ends, I'm at peace, knowing that our love story will help others find their way to acceptance and understanding." Through the window, autumn leaves danced across the sidewalk. The ring on the bridge post would soon catch the season's last warm light, continuing its vigil over the town's complicated hearts. The Foundation's work was just beginning, but already they could feel the change. In themselves, in their community, in the way people spoke about love and forgiveness. Bill and Evelyn's greatest legacy wasn't just their daughter or their love story. It was the permission they'd given others to acknowledge the complexity of human hearts, to seek understanding instead of judgment, to build bridges instead of walls. Rocky barked softly, as if in agreement. Some things, like love, endure beyond all endings. 1 year after Bill's funeral, as autumn again painted Springfield in gold and crimson, Lily discovered one final secret that would change everything. She was organizing files in the Foundation's office when Rocky, now moving slower but still vigilant, began pawing at a loose floorboard beneath Bill's old desk. "What is it, boy?" Lily asked, kneeling beside him. The board came away easily, revealing a small metal box similar to the one they'd found at the bridge. Inside was a letter dated 2 days before Bill's death, and a USB drive. Lily called an emergency family meeting. Within an hour, they all gathered in the office. Margaret, Claire, Thomas, Sarah, and Robert. Rocky lay at Claire's feet as Lily connected the USB drive to her laptop. "It's a video," she said, her voice trembling. "Dad recorded it." Bill's face filled the screen, looking tired but peaceful. He sat in his study, the afternoon light casting shadows across his face. The timestamp showed it was recorded the day before he died. "My dear family," he began, "if you're watching this, then the Foundation is running, and you've all begun to heal. But there's one final truth you need to know. The real reason why I arranged everything this way." The family leaned forward, Margaret gripping Claire's hand tightly. "Evelyn and I didn't just reconnect 3 years ago when we found Claire. We never truly lost contact. For 60 years, we were part of an underground network, helping other couples like us, people separated by society's expectations, forbidden loves, hidden children. The bridge wasn't just our meeting place. It was a waypoint for dozens of families seeking reunion." The revelation stunned the room into silence. Bill continued. "The journals Evelyn kept weren't just observations. They were records. Every family we helped, every child reunited with their birth parents, every couple who found their way back to each other. We couldn't live our own love story, but we could help others write theirs." He pulled out a leather ledger, opening it to reveal lists of names, dates, and locations. "This USB drive contains everything, all the records, all the stories. The Foundation isn't just my legacy, it's the continuation of work that's been happening in Springfield for decades. There are others like us, working quietly to heal broken families. They'll contact you soon." Lily paused the video as Claire pulled out her phone, showing them an email she'd received that morning from an unlisted address. "They already have," she said. "I thought it was a regular case inquiry, but..." The email was signed The Bridgekeepers and referenced details only Bill and Evelyn would have known. Bill's voice continued. "Margaret, my love, you knew some of this. Those business trips where things didn't quite add up, the late-night phone calls. I was helping other families. Your quiet acceptance of my absences gave others their chance at happiness." Margaret nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "I suspected," she whispered. "I chose not to ask." "Claire," Bill continued, "you weren't the only child Evelyn and I helped find their way home. There were dozens. Some of them still live in Springfield. They'll need your help now, your medical expertise, your understanding of complex family dynamics." The video continued, revealing an intricate network of safe houses, sympathetic officials, and complex arrangements that had operated in secret for decades. Bill and Evelyn hadn't just lived a love story, they'd created an underground railroad of the heart, helping others overcome the same barriers that had separated them. "The Foundation must continue this work," Bill insisted, "but now it can happen in the light. The world is ready for these stories. The bridge will remain your symbol, your meeting place, your sanctuary. But you're not alone anymore." As the video ended, Rocky stood and walked to the door, whining softly. When Claire opened it, they found a small group of people waiting outside, men and women of various ages, some looking familiar from around town. Each carried a journal similar to Evelyn's. "We were part of their network," the eldest woman said. "We've been waiting for Bill's signal to come forward. There are more of us, in other towns, other cities. We're ready to help the Foundation expand." The family looked at each other, understanding dawning. Bill and Evelyn's love story hadn't ended. It had multiplied, creating ripples that would continue to spread. Their foundation wasn't just about healing their own family. It was about continuing a legacy of love that had been quietly changing lives for decades. Rocky wagged his tail, recognizing these visitors who had probably passed through Bill's study many times over the years. The dog had been more than just a companion. He had been a witness to countless reunions, a guardian of Springfield's most powerful secrets. The bridge, the foundation, the hidden network, it was all connected, all part of Bill and Evelyn's greater love story. A story that would continue to grow, to heal, to build bridges between hearts that thought themselves forever separated. The last secret was finally revealed, but it was really just the beginning. I hope you enjoyed this story. Let me know if you'd like me to expand on any part or continue with the aftermath of this revelation.